Hello everyone, my name is Susanna Reyes and I chose to do my project on Erich Fromm. So a little bit about Fromm was that he was born in Germany in the 1900s. He actually left Germany in 1933 and this was due to the rise of World War II. Both his parents were deeply religious, so therefore he grew up Jewish, but later on in his life he actually became atheist. So he was known as a humanistic psychoanalyst, which is a person who believes in the essential worth and dignity of each person, and in the importance of helping each person to do the most with what she or he has. So most of his values were shaped on the fact that he was alive during World War II and World War I as well, so he was around a lot of violence and war. So he was a civil rights activist. He was in the movement against nuclear weapons. He was the Vietnam War. He also participated in the protection of the environment movement. He also considered himself a socialist. So throughout his life, he had 3 marriages. His first marriage was actually with another psychoanalyst. And although they divorced, they still had a professional relationship later on. His second wife actually died, and his third wife he remained with until he died. I know the professor mentioned something about him being married to Karen Horney, but I actually never found anything on that, but I did find that they had some type of affair. So that's kind of interesting. And Fromm actually passed away from a heart attack at the age of 80. He studied psychology, philosophy, sociology, and something that's very interesting about him is that he actually didn't he had no medical training, so he only got his PhD, and this is something that affected him throughout his whole career as a psychologist. So some of the careers that he had, his first career was a rabbi, I believe that's how you say it. Which is a Jewish teacher. And then later he became a professor. He taught at places such as Michigan State, Yale, and NYU, and then the University of Mexico. And he was also a writer. He wrote many books. So one of his books was called Escape from Freedom, where it's kind of the concept that freedom is actually causing psychological problems in humans because we are so focused on trying to be individuals and different from other people that we find it hard to connect to a society, I guess. And in that way, we are also disconnecting from nature. His approach and his theories were more of a social psychological orientation. So it was more of like the study of how sociological factors contribute to a person's psychology. So his definition of personality was the totality of inherited and acquired psychic qualities which are characterized of one individual and which make the individual unique. So he believed that people can experience the same environment but in different ways. His belief was more based around character, so he identified the individual character as the true character, so like thoughts that are automatic and behaviors that are automatic. And then we also have like the social character, which are patterns of behaviors that are structured by one's social and cultural patterns. And there are actually 5 of these social characters. So the ideal is the productive character, so that it's the one that we'd want most people to be like, which is to be loving and independent. So this person does not transfer his responsibility onto another authority. They are free. And then there are 4 unproductive characters. So the first one is receptive, which the source of good is outside of them. So they look for good outside of them. So therefore they become dependent, and they seek to receive rather than to give. So if we were talking about love, then they seek to feel loved rather than to give love. And the second one is exploitive, which is also, the source is also the source of good is also on the outside. So they take things rather than expect to receive them. So I guess in love, if we're talking about the same thing, we could say that they kind of like try to force people to love them, but yet it's, in a way, it's like it's forceful. It's not like trying to get them to love them. So they're, I guess you can see it as like grabbing or stealing or manipulating people into loving them. So one of the characters, a person that can identify with this character would probably be Hitler. And then there's the third one, which is hoarding, which the source of good is inside of themselves. So in this case, like they like to keep everything. So if it comes to love, they like to keep it. They don't like to give it away, and they tend to be demanding too. And the fourth one is marketing, which is a person that tends to sell themselves to seem rare. So this is actually a very new concept, because it's not something that really happened back then. It has more to do with the society we live in today. But although these characters sound really bad, we also need to remember that there are also positive aspects to each of these characters. So, for example, while someone might see a hoarding character as being possessive, like let's say with money, others can see them as being practical or economical or being very careful with their money. So there's like the good and bad. So he had another kind of theory, I guess you can say, which is actually very similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and he called them the essential needs. So there were 8, and he believed that many people shared these similar problems and needs. So the first one is frame of orientation, which is finding a goal and a life purpose. Number 2 is relatedness, which is trying to unite with others, and this revolves around the concept of love. And there's 3, which is rootedness, which is being connected to our natural ties. This could be either a culture or religion or something that just feels natural to us. And there's identity, which is seeing oneself as an individual separate from others. And there's also unity, which is feeling connected to oneself, or feeling connected to nature, and feeling connected to other human beings. Number 6 is transcendence, which revolves the idea of you either are creating or destroying, so it, in a sense, would be like love or hating. And number 7 is effectiveness. So this is like our personal need to feel that we need to make an impact on the world, or like leave our mark once we die. And then 8 is excitation and stimulation, which is exactly what it sounds like. Just the need to experience some type of excitement in our lives. So one of the questions that we had to go over was, how important is infancy to Fromm? So, to Fromm, infancy is actually very important. Personality or character, whichever you'd like to call it, because he sees kind of them interchangeably, is heavily shaped by previous generation to him. He really sees people as having these thoughts that come from previous generation that make them up. It's not just shaped around their culture. So in the book it is said that he didn't believe that people were just a blank sheet of paper that culture can take over, but that they already have some characteristics within them, which, whether I think he would mean being genetics, that make up their personality or character. And does he believe that personality can change? Fromm doesn't really believe that personality can change. Well, he does. So he believes it is very difficult for people's personalities to change. So he was actually a pioneer humanist, which means that he doesn't go off of what we define as humanists today. So he was a pioneer of humanist. Although he doesn't believe that it's impossible for people to change, he does believe that it is very difficult for people to change. His views on religion are really interesting. He defines religion as any system of thought and action shared by a group, which gives the individual a frame of orientation and an object for devotion. So, with this definition of religion, I think it's very applicable to really anything, and he says so himself, that it doesn't have to be an actual religion like Christianity or Buddhism or anything like that. Like, it can be anything, like a political party, like, or just a famous person. If you think very highly of them and stuff, then they can literally be a religion, your religion. So he split up religion into two different sections. So one was authoritarian, which is a religion in which one surrenders our power to a higher power. So this revolves around the idea of obedience to the higher power, but at the same time you're feeling protected by them. But at the same time, you have like a sense of loss of independence. It's not as free. And his second view on religion is a humanistic religion. It says that man's aim in humanistic religion is to achieve the greatest strength, not the greatest powerlessness. Virtue is self-realization, not obedience. So in this sense, like, people are more free, and it's not about fear. No, it's not about fear of a higher power. So his views on women. So he believes that biologically, women were vulnerable and dependent on men. But culturally, they were oppressed by the patriarchy. So he actually very much admired, like, qualities in women. So he admired specifically their nurturing qualities and their loving qualities. And he criticized men's qualities, such as aggression and destruction. So I guess in a way you can say he was kind of moving towards that feminism, like, way of seeing things. He did believe that women were dependent on men, but the thing is that he didn't believe it in the sense that he literally thought that women were less than men. Rather, he knew that it had to do with the culture that we live in, and not so much with biology. But in his writing, his views were actually very contradicting, And I think this might have been because just simply the time that he was living in, it was such a new concept to really think about, as women as actually having their own thoughts and ideas and being equal to men. That was something like that people didn't really take into consideration very much. So his views, when I was researching his views on women, it was very hard to find his actual view, I guess, on women, because I think he had his own struggle in trying to balance that women are biologically different, but they are being oppressed because of culture, not because they are actually worthless. So I think he himself struggled very much in trying to portray that in his writing. So some of the things that make Fromm interesting, I think, is that the idea of him like being a philosopher versus a scientific theorist. So he studied psychology, but the thing is that he also studied many things. Like I said before, he studied philosophy and sociology. So once you know something, you can't really just like forget all about it and just stick to one thing. So he really incorporated like his views of sociology and philosophy into psychology. And he didn't think that the only way of seeing psychology was strictly through science. He believed that it was much more than that. And I think this is one of the reasons also that his ideas were very much undermined, because people didn't see him as being a scientific psychologist, I guess. So he was also a humanist pioneer, which I talked about earlier too. So he believed in optimism, love, productivity, connection with humans and nature. That's all something that he kind of brought out. And he was like I said, he was a pioneer. So he's not the definition of what a humanist is in our view today, but he did bring up those concepts. So I believe that some of his influences for his ideas had very much to do with two things. First off was his parents. His parents, they Fromm stated that he actually became really interested in understanding people because his mom, he noticed as a child, he noticed that his mom was prone to being depressed and his dad was very moody. So that really sparked in him to understand. He believed he had a lot of issues because of his parents. Another great influence in his ideas, I believe, were oh, and by the way, because of his parents, he was seeking for answers, for like an explanation of why his parents were this way, and through his parents he found the ideas of Freud, which is one of his greatest influences. His second greatest influence was World War One. So at the time of World War One, he was actually 14 years old, and he noticed how much propaganda shifted people's views, and that obviously that broke his heart, but that interested him very much, because he was seeing like these boys go into war, and they weren't being like necessarily forced into war. They were literally going into it because they were patriotic about their country and everything. So he noticed the propaganda, and through this he also was seeking answers, and he found Marx, which was another one of his greatest influences on his views about the world and war. So, compared to other theorists, so one of the theorists that we can compare Fromm to is Sigmund Freud. So, he Fromm was actually seen as a person who was like anti-Fromm. I mean, anti-Freud, sorry. But he actually wasn't. He actually thought very highly of him. But he also did know that some of the things that he said weren't necessarily right. So he thought that Freud's ideas were actually very one of his ideas that he thought was that he liked Freud's ideas of the unconscious. He thought it had a tremendous impact on psychology, which it did, and he admired that very much. But yet he also noticed that Freud had an intense emphasis on biology, and he didn't really like that because Fromm saw many things through a sociology point of view or like a cultural point of view. So that's where his thoughts of Freud shifted. So also Freud's view on women didn't necessarily coincide with Fromm's view on women. Like I said, he actually really admired women's capability of being nurturing and loving. And Freud, on the other hand, saw them as being oppressed, but not because of culture, but literally because he believed that they weren't equal to men. But something that I guess they had somewhat similar was their views on religion. Freud thought of Freud and in some ways Fromm thought of religion as an illusion. So Freud saw it as a need of higher power to help us from committing the violent acts, I guess, or from our violent impulses. And Fromm, he actually, like I said, he became an atheist. Because I don't know why he became an atheist, to be honest, but from what I think he might believe that being real in a religion or having a religion that is authoritarian can have a really bad impact on you because you're constantly dependent on a higher power and you give up your independency. But although there are some pros, which is like you feel like you're being protected by another higher power. But yeah, those are his views on religion. They're kind of similar in a way to Freud's. Another person that he was very similar to was Karen Horney. I'm pretty sure they spent some time together, so they were able to share some ideas. So she was also a neo-Freudian, which means that she very much considered Freud's thoughts, but didn't necessarily believe in them, but she used them in her studies. Another way that Horney and Fromm are similar is their idea of personality / character. So Horney believed in the actual self, which was the person you are at the moment, the idealized self, the person who one should be, and then the real self, which is the person who one could be. And I think the actual self, the person that we are at the moment, is very similar to Fromm's individual character, which is the character in which all of our true, I guess, thoughts and behaviors and automatic behaviors come out. Another idea that they had kind of similar, and I think it's because Horney was very much an influence in the way Freud thought about women. So was the whole womb envy. So this womb envy was the idea that boys are actually envious of girls' capability to give birth, and this is something that Fromm agreed with. I mean, doesn't disregard penis envy, but it states that it could be vice versa. The envy could be vice versa. So I guess another thing that they agreed on was that the idea that humans can be exploitive. Fromm categorized his characters into two different sections. So one was symbiotic and the other one was withdrawal. So symbiotic were people who were involved in relationships in which one of the persons in the relationship was submissive while the other person was exploitive. And withdrawal was when a person views the other person as a threat. So this is very similar to Horney's concept of moving towards people and moving away from people. So moving towards would be like symbiotic, which is the neurotic need for a partner and affection. And moving away from people are people who seek isolation. So this would be similar to Fromm's idea of withdrawal character, which, like I said before, was they view people as a threat, so therefore they would want to be isolated. So something that's different about Horney and Fromm is that Horney was actually very recognized in the psychology world. She was recognized as for her study in women's psychology, and also for being a neo-Freudian. She was very against many of Freud's views. So on the other hand, Fromm wasn't very popular, I guess, in the psychology world. I think this might have to do with the whole fact that his ideas were more philosophical and sociological, had more to do with sociology and philosophy and stuff like that, rather than, I guess you can say, psychology. It was maybe too early to incorporate all of his studies into psychology. People didn't appreciate it as much as I think they should have. They instead they told him that his views weren't scientific, and they very much brought up the fact that he did not have a medical education, and that hurt his psychology, I guess, career very much, his popularity in psychology. So now to what would Fromm say about me? So we took a test for one of our food for thoughts, and I still have the answers to that. So I tried to make it as unbiased as I could, but I don't know. I don't know how reliable the test really is. I guess it just depends on how honest you are, and I tried to be as honest as I could. So here are my scores. So I actually got the highest score in being receptive, which means that some of my negative characteristics would be that I'm passive, opinionless, submissive, and gullible. And those four, I guess I somewhat agree with. I don't want to agree with, but I do. But on the other hand, you can see the positive side of it, which would be you would be able to consider me accepting, polite, trusting, and devoted. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's what he would say about me. And as for his other theory about needs, I guess there, since he has no specific order of needs like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, something he might tell me would be that I should be I should focus on my rootedness, I guess feeling connected. Like I think with my not necessarily my religion, but I think with my culture. I think that's something that I very much need. And another thing I think he would say was that I need to work on my transcendence, which is the need to either create or destroy. So, one of the quotes that I really like from him is that creativity requires the courage to let go of certainties. And I think this very much has to do with today's world. Like, I don't think we're allowed to let go of certainties as much. It's kind of like how people viewed Fromm. They wanted him to be very scientific and facts and stuff like that, but without bringing in so much philosophy and psychology. I mean, philosophy and sociology, just things that he sees in the world. They didn't value that as much. And I think that's how creativity is seen in today's world. I think sometimes it's not valued very much because it's not a certainty, it's not a fact. So that's an idea I like from him. So to conclude, I would like to say that in the 80 years that Fromm lived, he was known as a psychologist, psychoanalyst, sociologist, humanistic philosopher, and a democratic sociologist. He was known as so many things. It's crazy. So I like this idea. I think this is the reason I chose to do him for this project. He was not only a psychologist, but he was also a humanist, and he actually voiced his ideas and his thoughts on human rights and about war. And I also like how he incorporated all of his education. He didn't just simply block out his sociology and philosophy perspective of psychology. He incorporated it into psychology. I also like his ideas that he believed that ethics was a part of psychology, because as we know, like many psychology research has been done that hasn't exactly been ethical, and we learn about this in our classes, and he actually considers these things, the ethics behind psychology. He was a person that questioned things. He questioned capitalism, he questioned democracy, he questioned totalitarianism, and I think, like I said before, this has a lot to do with the time he grew up. He grew up in the time of war. Like, I don't see how people wouldn't question this, but I guess many people did, because he saw people simply just buy into all this propaganda in the war era. So yeah, I think the thing that captivated me about Fromm's ideas were his views on war and religion and love, and this quote I think ties like all those things together. So the quote says, "Just as love for one individual, which excludes the love for others, is not love, love for one's country, which is not part of one's love for humanity, is not love, but idolatrous worship." This is the reference page if you want to look at any of the facts. Yeah. Thank you.